Within many spiritual traditions of the world, there appear to be two layers of learning, or wisdom. There is the exoteric, the outer teachings and knowledge which the majority of believers will know, and then there is the esoteric, the inner learnings and wisdom, which only the select few will be made aware of. You may ask, why is this so? Well, the explanation is most likely to be twofold. 1. There are some things the hierarchy decide that only the privileged should know, or be allowed to know after a certain length of membership. 2. It acts a bit like an advertisement, attracting those who like mystery, being like a secret club, similar to that which a child may be part of, which only the few best friends are invited to join, with passwords, codes, etc. To explain the differences between the two, I'll use the analogy of a cake. Where one group understands the cake, its flavor and look, the other will understand the ingredients involved, and the chefs will only pass on the recipe to the chosen few. However, who decides who the chosen few are? In the majority of traditions there is the process of discernment and also the ability to identify a true seeker, via questioning and or observing the seeker and noting a possible, natural inclination or proclivity. For these few, the secret knowledge is a chance to know, understand the deeper mysteries and meanings. Why is there a dichotomy though? Well, it's more than likely that not everyone would understand the deeper aspects, but the two levels of learning are intrinsically linked. Both lead to the same understanding but at different levels. If we liken it to our cake recipe again, the exoteric will appreciate the cake, its taste, texture and the way it looks, but the esoteric will appreciate the cake but understand how the techniques, ingredients and preparation are achieved and why they are used this way. For some, liking the cake and appreciating it is enough, whereas for others, they need to know the process, appreciate the cake, its ingredients, the procedures employed and the baker. A lot of teachings in spiritual traditions have a metaphorical cloak over them, as if they hide secret powers, magic and symbolism. It is indeed true though that, like the saying, don't cast pearls before swine, giving pearls to pigs would lead the pig to eat the pearls without realizing that the pearl is actually a valued item. Moreover, it wouldn't be able to discern what is important and valued. It's a biblical reference, yet true, just as Paul the Apostle also compared newcomers as partaking of baby food whereas mature believers have adult food. In a similar way, the difference between exo and esoteric can be compared to these principles. You can also consider it this way: you wouldn't teach a huge illusion as your first amateur magic performance. Magic and illusions have often been associated with inner societies, just as the occult has. Spells, magic and sorcery have various levels within their hierarchies, but whether sorcery or faith, there appears to be the need to cloak the hidden, deeper truth. As mentioned tacitly before, such things can be used as an advertisement, asking the inquirer to join and discover the ageless and age-old teachings. The carrot being dangled might be a learning a lot further down the line, which the aspirant keeps their eye on and gets constantly frustrated by, due to having to complete other objectives before reaching their aim of the education. This filters out true seekers, who will endure the process, for the others will drop by the wayside. The real student will want to study the lessons required. The principle of wisdom being taught will have two journeys to understand it. The first is usually the obvious lesson, which is the exoteric, and the second lesson, the esoteric, is learning the same thing but having the wisdom covered by a task or process. For example, in the film Karate Kid, Daniel wants to learn karate, so the master tells him to wax the floor, wax on, wax off, paint the fence, up the stroke, down the stroke, and Daniel gets frustrated. However, Mr. Miyagi is teaching him karate moves where the techniques in waxing and painting are defensive blocks. This is a good esoteric teaching method. An exoteric way of learning it would be to read a book and practice the moves, as Daniel does earlier in the film. So the layers are not just perspectives, but methods of teaching. With the exo and esoteric you cannot arguably have one without the other, for they appear to go hand in hand. Just like the age-old question of, what came first, the chicken or the egg? You need both the chicken and the egg to have the issue to resolve. Equally, the spiritual systems of education have inner and outer levels, schools or the equivalent of these, whether a priest, monk, magus or otherwise, The inner and outer serve a purpose. In regards to spiritual teachings, a prime way of explaining the two levels comes in the form of parables. More than once, Jesus teaches the crowds via parables, but when he is alone with his disciples, he explains the lesson at a different level. The parable of the seeds is a really good example. While a large crowd was gathering and people were coming to Jesus from town after town, he told this parable. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path. It was trampled on, and the birds ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground, and when it came up, the plants withered because they had no moisture. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up with it and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil. It came up and yielded a crop, 100 times more than was sown. When he said this, he called out, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." His disciples asked him what this parable meant. He said, "The knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but to others I speak in parables, so that, though seeing, they may not see, though hearing, they may not understand." This is the meaning of the parable. The seed is the word of God. Those along the path are the ones who hear, and then the devil comes and takes away the word from their hearts, so that they may not believe and be saved. Those on the rocky ground are the ones who receive the word with joy when they hear it, but they have no root. They believe for a while, but in the time of testing they fall away. The seed that fell among thorns stands for those who hear, but as they go on their way they are choked by life's worries, riches and pleasures, and they do not mature. But the seed on good soil stands for those with a noble and good heart, who hear the word, retain it, and by persevering produce a crop. Luke 8:4-15. The same lesson has two ways to understand it. The parable would be, as Paul calls it, baby food, and the discussion with the disciples is the adult food. The Sufi have a system of education that employs what these days is known as taxonomies of learning. The peak of learning is the synthesis and practice of a lesson that's been taught, in other words to live it out, in a practical sense, much like to how Christ would say that we are to be a living word. To be a living sermon in action, not just something read or preached about, is the aim in Sufi teachings. They also employ a lot of esoteric teachings which are expertly portrayed, especially so in the story of Al-Khiḍr. And Moses said to his servant, "I will not cease from my wanderings until I have reached the place where the two seas meet, even though I journey for 80 years. But when they had reached the place where the two seas meet, they forgot their fish, and it took its way through a stream to the sea. And when they had journeyed past this place, Moses said to his servant, 'Bring us our breakfast, for we are weary from this journey.' But the other replied, 'See what has befallen me. When we were resting there by the rock, I forgot the fish. Only Satan can have put it out of my mind,' and in wondrous fashion it took its way to the sea. Then Moses said, 'That is the place we seek.' And they went back the way they had come. And they found one of our servants, whom we had endowed with our grace and our wisdom. Moses said to him, 'Shall I follow you, that you may teach me for my guidance some of the wisdom you have learned?' But he answered, 'You will not bear with me, for how should you bear patiently with things you cannot comprehend?' Moses said, 'If Allah wills, you shall find me patient. I shall not in anything disobey you.' He said, 'If you are bent on following me, you must ask no question about anything till I myself speak to you concerning it.' The two set forth, but as soon as they embarked, Moses' companion bored a hole in the bottom of the ship. 'A strange thing you have done,' exclaimed Moses. 'Is it to drown her passengers that you have bored a hole in her?' 'Did I not tell you,' he replied, 'that you would not bear with me?' 'Pardon my forgetfulness,' said Moses, 'do not be angry with me on this account.' They journeyed on until they fell in with a certain youth. Moses' companion slew him, and Moses said, 'You have killed an innocent man who has done no harm. Surely you have committed a wicked crime.' 'Did I not tell you,' he replied, 'that you would not bear with me?' Moses said, 'If ever I question you again, abandon me, for then I should deserve it.' They traveled on until they came to a certain city. They asked the people for some food, but the people declined to receive them as the guests. There they found a well on the point of falling down. The other raised it up, and Moses said, "Had you wished, you could have demanded payment for your labors. Now the time has arrived when we must part," said the other, "but first I will explain to you those acts of mine which you could not bear with impatience. Know that the ship belonged to some poor fishermen. I damaged it because in their rear was a king who was taking every ship by force. As for the youth, his parents both are true believers, and we feared lest he should plague them with his wickedness and unbelief. It was our wish that their Lord should grant them another in his place, a son more righteous and more filial. As for the wall, it belonged to 2 orphan boys in the city whose father was an honest man. Beneath it their treasure is buried. Your Lord decreed in his mercy that they should dig out the treasure when they grew to manhood. What I did was not done by caprice. That is the meaning of the things you could not bear with impatience." Surah 18, Al-Kahf, of the Holy Quran. The person referred to as one of our servants, whom we had endowed with our grace and our wisdom, is the figure of Khidr, the verdant one, who plays a pivotal role in Islamic mysticism and Sufism. Not only do the 2 C's of the tale, mentioned at the beginning of the tale, represent the 2 concepts of exo and esoteric, but the whole story is almost a perfect way of how someone attains and understands teachings, by reading the story as well as reading the story that is in between the lines. It's similar to a parable, but the outer and inner meanings are right in front you in the one tale. It's just having your eyes, or perception, open to see the differing levels. The Zen school approached this by suspending the thinking mind to encounter that moment of realization, whereas the Sufi, and other schools, aim to open the mind by direct encounters of the learning involved. When it comes to what purports to be the occult, the principles, mentioned above remain the same. It's just that the darkness is what appeals to the participants. It's a bit like Star Wars really, when you think of it, there's white, gray and black magic, which can be compared to Star Wars Jedi, Grey Jedi and the Sith, all of which use the Force, the light for good, selfless reasons, and dark side for bad, selfish reasons. So whether occult-based, Hindu, Jew, Zoroastrian, Buddhist, Christian, Muslim or otherwise, the basic principles are the same, yet all have exoteric and esoteric values that are studied and taught according to the level that engages you. The esoteric schools, at first, appear as if they embrace the mystical style, being somewhat abstract, but ironically this is why it is esoteric. The mystics use metaphor and styles synonymous with art, being expressive and linking science, mathematics and scripture in a sword tapestry, weaving everything together as one. The mystic will express the universe, interconnectedness, inter alia, in forms that appear unscientific, like art and music that don't make sense for the majority, and this is why so often it is the few who understand these inner concepts that make them, and the school, esoteric. I once wrote 2 books about the same subject. One was The Mystic's Handbook, and the other, A Toolkit for Living. Both covered the same subject matter, but the handbook was the mystical approach whereas the toolkit was the pragmatic approach. Just as there are many teaching styles, there are also learning styles. These days we can study and analyze learning and teaching to help the learner do well at school, college, university, but in the past it hasn't always been obvious if the teachers knew varying types of learning. In Zen, there is a predominant style that seems cryptic, but the one cap doesn't fit all the pupils' heads, which has led to arguments over which is the best process for enlightenment, the process of gradual illumination or sudden, but both lead to the same result. In Sufism, the aspect of education has very much been studied, and instead of using Zen koans, riddles, they use anecdotes and practical examples, like sending someone on a task. If a murid, student, has difficulty understanding a subject, the murshid, tutor, may send them to another peer, sheikh or murshid to get the lesson through to them. Another thing the Sufis do so well is take age-old lessons and make them contemporary, so wherever you are and whatever time you're in, the principle is learned by adapting to the time and culture. The Zen approach tends to utilize the same age-old principles without changing according to circumstances. I am aware of the varying styles of teaching and learning for both teacher and student, master and pupil. I studied to be a teacher, After serving in the armed forces, and after becoming a teacher, I continued to examine education and training itself. One of my heroes is John Dewey, who was a champion of education. His philosophy and approach, nay attitude, to teaching is something I would encourage you to look into. His vision of education emphasized the necessity of learning by doing. According to his theory, people learn best through a hands-on approach, and as a result, the philosophy of John Dewey is placed in the educational philosophy of pragmatism. Dewey also said that education can happen anywhere, which makes his ideas on learning virtually identical to the Sufi approach. Education very much used to be in the style of, I say and you listen, and read from the chalkboard and write it down, until the likes of Dewey came along, and like him, I also believe that learning can happen anywhere, and it is always better to apply and use the principle learnt as soon as possible. I am also a firm believer in reflective thinking, which aids the educational journey, so it's not just about what you've learned but also contemplating why it works and how did it work. Some people are happy to know that when you turn on the light switch you get light, but others want to know how it works, and this is what I consider essential to learning, hence my appreciation of Dewey and Sufi teaching approaches. So, as you can probably tell by now, differences between exoteric and esoteric teachings tend to be different educational approaches. The general overview and teaching is exoteric, and more specific information, knowledge and wisdom is the esoteric. Because of the minority being esoteric, the learning is a lot deeper and can be more effective. In my opinion, teaching fewer people is better than teaching big classes, hence if you want a healthy overview of information, a classroom is ideal. If you want to know things in depth, find out, think, examine and explore ideas, then being in a small group is even better. This also consolidates what I mentioned earlier, where you can't really have the esoteric without the exoteric. To finish, remember that inasmuch as there are mystical and ordinary approaches, as well as the need for a willing learner to engage at various levels, the following principle remains the same. You wouldn't give a 50-year-old whiskey to someone who has never tried it before. Just as you shouldn't give a pistol to a 5-year-old. You wouldn't give someone access to your family heirlooms that you have only just met, nor would you give a 4-year-old the complete works of Shakespeare. If you happen to discover a 4-year-old reading Shakespeare, that's different altogether, for they may have a proclivity for that field of literature, and a true seeker is potentially spotted.